Do we see a regression when removing punishment from our behavior therapy plans? The answer is actually no, although it might seem like we do. Understanding why we're not actually seeing a regression is super important to understanding our success in behavior therapy and in influencing how we approach the work. So I'm going to talk about why we're not actually seeing a regression and why I think it matters for my clients to understand that. When behavior is punished, whether that punishment is done intentionally or unintentionally, the behavior becomes less likely to occur again. That is the definition of punishment. When that's an intentional part of our dog training work, what we're doing is we are suppressing the behaviors. Typically, we're suppressing behaviors that we don't want, biting, growling, lunging, vocalizing. And of course, we know that this has incredible fallout because those behaviors are symptoms. So not only are we suppressing our data, but we are increasing the threat that our dog perceives. Now, if they see another dog and their nervous system perceives that as a threat and becomes activated, that activation itself now predicts further threat, which in the grand scheme of things increases anxiety. It increases the chance of aggressive behavior, although it decreases the warning signs that we're going to get. And it can make doing evidence-based behavior therapy a bit harder because we've often suppressed away our data and have to work really hard to get that back. So someone could perceive that when those suppressive methods are removed, their dog regresses. And this would be the case if they are focusing on behavior as the data, as the metric. So they're saying, well, my dog used to walk by this other dog 10 feet away without barking and lunging when I was using suppression. And now that I'm not using suppression at 10 feet away, my dog is lunging and barking. And that can feel like regression. But what is actually happening is that threat has been removed. We have lessened the amount of threat the dog perceives. They were always distressed 10 feet away from the other dog. They are actually perceiving less threat now. What their behavior, their unsuppressed behavior, is telling us is that 10 feet is way too close, and it always was. And so, while if we're just looking at the behavior as a metric, if we're taking a very superficial look there, we might say, the behavior got worse. But in actuality, we have taken big steps forward in decreasing threat and in gathering data, which now tells us this was way too close. The dog was always over threshold and we were actively doing more harm, even though behaviorally it looked better because that's how suppression works. But it actually was not better. Those drills we were doing walking 10 feet away from the dog were actually strengthening our dog's negative association toward other dogs. So we can see that when we have an understanding of that nuance, we are not actually regressing in our work of making the dog's nervous system feel safer, which is the work of behavior therapy, because these behaviors that we're seeing are a result of various types of dysregulation. And the quickest way to become dysregulated is to perceive threat. Now, as a behavior consultant, part of my work is to help my clients understand the utility of what we're doing. And that's important for a number of reasons, because they are more likely to participate in this process if they understand why they are being asked to do certain things. And because I ultimately want them to be able to think critically about what they've learned. I don't want them to have to rely on me for the duration of their dog's life to figure out if something is good for their dog, or if their dog needs support, or how to raise or lower criteria. Those are skills that I want my client to ultimately hold themselves. Part of that is that I want to make sure that my client is not relying on observable behavior as the main metric of their dog's well-being. I want them to think critically about what can suppress behavior, because suppression can happen unintentionally. So I want them thinking about the entire context, the entire situation, and really being discerning. So if the dog, for example, ends up in a freeze state and is perceived by those around them as fine, I want my client to say, behavior is only one data point, and although my dog is not, engaging in a fight or flight response that I can see, I still suspect that they are distressed based on these other data points. What could be going on? They've been pushed into a freeze response. let's adjust. And they're going to adjust way differently if they understand that despite the dog's behavior being more manageable in the moment, the dog is experiencing huge levels of stress than if they perceive the dog to be fine. The other piece is that in a lot of balanced or compulsion-based training circles, you'll hear people say that it gets worse before it gets better. And I want that to be a red flag to my clients. I want them to slow down and get suspicious if something is getting worse before it gets better. And so in order for them to do that well, they need to understand how to measure whether something is getting worse or better. And if they don't have that deeper understanding, if they're stuck at that superficial level of viewing behavior, they aren't going to have that discernment. And that's going to make it easier for them to fall prey to bad guidance. So what do I tell my clients instead? Because understanding the utility of what we do is so important, one of the main places that I start with teaching my human clients is around what is happening to the dog's nervous system. I work exclusively with dogs who are experiencing either chronic dysregulation or displaying aggressive behavior, usually as part of dysregulation. And so it's really important that my clients understand from the beginning that the behavior is a symptom of the dysregulation. That makes our main priority threat reduction. Our goal is to teach the dog's nervous system that they are safe. And I want them to have a really good nuanced understanding of this. And I want us to have a shared language around this. So we talk about the stress scale, green, yellow, orange, red, and 5 different data points: body language, behavior, fine motor skills, the digestive system, and the ability to process information. And we talk about how those data points might show up in observable behaviors in those different stress zones. And then we tie that into specific things that my clients have observed. So for example, if I had a client who was moving from suppression-based practices to non-suppression-based practices, we might talk about what body language we noticed, what behavior we noticed, fine motor skills, the dog's ability to process information, what their digestive system was doing within the context of these setups where they were using suppression. And we might talk about how suppression could be influencing things like the behavior, but we're still going to get really good information about the dog's stress levels from their body language, for example, from the information that we have about how they respond in other circumstances, from those other data points. And then we're going to talk about how suppression can mess up our data. And when we remove the suppression, what data do we get there? And through that, we're going to be able to place where the dog is on the stress scale. And we're going to be able to recognize that, oh, the dog was stressed the whole time. They were in distress the whole time. And the data shows us that. It shows us that much more overtly, much more clearly when we're not using suppression that's messing up our data. And so then my client is set up to look at this through a lens where rather than going, my dog is regressing, they go, my dog was feeling really unsafe and I couldn't hear it. Now I can, thank goodness. Now I can adjust the environment. Now our work can be much more successful. Now my dog's well-being can truly increase. And I really want them to have that understanding, because I want them thinking critically about their own relationship with their dog, for example. I want them to think, my dog is barking at me and I'm turning away and ignoring them because that's what I think you're supposed to do. But wait a minute, is this actually punishing? Is my dog actually communicating with me and I'm withdrawing connection and safety as a result? How might that impact my dog's well-being? How might that impact their stress levels, their perception of threat? How might that impact our relationship and my role as their safe person? And in order to get to the place that my clients can have that discernment and can think critically about all of these different components, they have to have that understanding that that superficial understanding of behavior is not going to get them where they want to be. And so that's why I wouldn't use the language of regression when they're seeing that shift in behavior. And if they used that language, I would want to dive into that more with them.